Maintaining safety of flight is your number one priority as a pilot. Some safety considerations apply during every flight, while others apply only in certain situations. Every flight is different, and as pilot in command, you need to consider the factors that can affect your flight and take appropriate actions to ensure safety. In this lesson, you'll learn about these safety considerations by exploring the following topics: collision avoidance techniques, including visual scanning, being aware of blind spots, using aircraft lighting, and performing clearing turns. Right-of-way rules to help avoid conflicting traffic situations. Minimum safe altitudes over specific types of terrain. Best practices for avoiding risks that might lead to controlled flight into terrain. And what to do when taxiing in wind to avoid being flipped or rolled over. Surprisingly, most mid-air collisions occur near airports, during daylight hours, and in VFR conditions. In fact, 82% of mid-air collisions occur at overtaking or converging angles and don't involve high rates of closure. This suggests that a consistent habit of looking outside the cockpit could avert most collisions. To see and avoid other aircraft, you must develop an effective visual scanning pattern. Scanning is most effective when you use a series of short, regularly spaced eye movements. The FAA recommends that you divide your windshield into 10-degree segments and then methodically focus on each segment for at least 1 second. One effective scanning technique begins at the far left of the windshield and makes a methodical sweep to the right, with pauses in each block of the windshield to focus your eyes. An alternative scanning method begins in the center block of the windshield and moves to the left, with pauses to focus in each block. After reaching the last block on the left, you swing quickly to the center block and repeat this action to the right. Be sure that the scan pattern you use covers all of the sky that you can see from the cockpit, both horizontally and vertically, with particular emphasis on the area 60 degrees to the left and right of the center visual area and 10 degrees up and down from your flight path. In addition to the limitations of your visual field, many other conditions can affect your ability to see traffic while scanning. For example, you cannot discern as much detail for objects in your peripheral vision as you can when they are in your central visual field. And you might not notice objects in your peripheral vision unless there is some relative motion. An airplane on a converging course doesn't have any relative motion unless there's a significant speed difference, so it might not catch your attention. When you're scanning for traffic, be especially alert for any aircraft that shows no movement, because this indicates that it's most likely on a collision course with your airplane. If the other aircraft shows no lateral or vertical motion, but is increasing in size, take immediate evasive action. As you scan, your eyes can take several seconds to refocus when switching from the instrument panel to distant objects outside of the airplane. To counter eye fatigue, it helps to focus on exterior parts of the aircraft as a transition from the inside to the outside of the cockpit. Sky conditions also affect your ability to see traffic. If the outside visibility is good, you have a better chance of spotting a hazard because haze or reduced visibility tends to make traffic and terrain features appear farther away than their actual distance. In bright sunlight, a clean windshield and sunglasses can help you see objects more clearly. In addition to the effect of sky conditions, the contrast between an aircraft and its background interferes with your ability to see it clearly. An aircraft below the horizon, silhouetted against a uniform landscape, has greater contrast with its environment than does a similar aircraft viewed against a cluttered background. Another phenomenon that can occur in reduced visibility is called empty field myopia. When you're looking at a featureless sky that's devoid of objects, contrasting colors, or patterns, your eyes tend to focus only 10 to 30 feet ahead. This means that out-of-focus spots on the windshield might appear to be airplanes, and distant traffic may go undetected. Under these conditions, an aircraft must be 2 to 3 times closer before you'll see it. When your eyes are focused straight ahead, how well can you see an object that's even with your ear and no more than 2 feet away? To discover the limitation of your peripheral vision, close your eyes and have a friend position his or her hand even with your ear and only 2 feet away. When you open your eyes, focus straight ahead. How well can you see your friend's hand when it's stationary? How about when it's moving up and down? This demonstration illustrates the difficulty in perceiving objects in your peripheral vision when there's no relative motion. Airplanes, like automobiles, have problems associated with blind spots. In both high-wing and low-wing aircraft designs, the fuselage and wings block portions of your view, which makes it difficult to see conflicting traffic. For example, in a high-wing airplane, it's easy to see below the airplane, but difficult to see the area above it. The reverse is true for low-wing airplanes. These blind spots can be a serious problem, particularly when turning or during the approach and landing phases of flight. For example, in a high-wing airplane, lowering the wing to start a turn immediately blocks your view. In addition, when a high-wing airplane is below a low-wing airplane on approach to landing, both airplanes can easily remain out of sight of one another. Similar problems can occur during departure. To reduce the possibility of a collision due to blind spots, prior to beginning a turn in a high-wing airplane, check the area for other aircraft by lifting the wing and looking in the direction of the turn. During extended climbs or descents, make shallow S-turns and avoid climbing or descending at steep angles. The pilots of these 2 training planes in Florida were fortunate enough to walk away from a normally fatal mid-air collision that occurred while both planes were on final for touch-and-go landings on the same runway. The low-wing Piper PA-28 Cadet descended onto a Cessna 152. The Piper's nose gear shattered the Cessna's windshield, and the 2 planes became stuck together. Neither pilot saw the other aircraft prior to the collision. The collision occurred at an altitude of about 200 feet AGL. The instructor in the Cessna took control of the aircraft from the student pilot and safely landed the interlocked aircraft in the grass near the runway. Amazingly, both aircraft sustained only minor damage. This accident, like most mid-air collisions, occurred in good visibility. According to FAR Part 91, all aircraft operated at night must meet specific lighting and equipment requirements. The requirements for position lights are a green light on the right wingtip, a red light on the left wingtip, and a white light on the tail. In addition, you must turn on anti-collision lights whenever the engine is running, day or night. These flashing red or white lights can be in a number of locations on the aircraft, but are most commonly found on the wingtips or the tail. You can extinguish anti-collision lights when they might interfere with safety. For example, turn off strobe lights when their brightness might be detrimental to the vision of others. To increase safety at airports, the FAA has established a voluntary program called Operation Lights On. This program encourages you to use your landing lights during departures and approaches, both day and night, especially when operating within 10 miles of an airport or in conditions of reduced visibility. Check your pilot's operating handbook for any limitations on the use of your aircraft lights. Interpreting the position lights of other aircraft can help you determine their direction of movement. For example, if you see a red position light to the right of a green light, the aircraft is flying toward you, while a steady white light combined with a flashing red light identifies an aircraft flying away from you. A steady red and a flashing red light indicates that the aircraft is crossing to your left, and a steady green and a flashing red light indicates that the aircraft is crossing to your right. Make it a habit to clear the area for traffic before performing maneuvers in the training or practice area. Clearing turns enable you to see areas blocked by blind spots and make it easier to maintain visual contact with other aircraft in the area. To clear the area, either perform 2 90-degree turns or perform one 180-degree turn followed by an entry to the practice maneuver as soon as possible. Remember to watch for traffic while turning. Keep in mind that the number of degrees in your turn is far less important than ensuring the airspace is free of traffic. As pilot in command, you're responsible for seeing and avoiding all traffic in visual flight conditions. To help avoid conflicting traffic situations in the air or the ground, the FAA established right-of-way rules. When another aircraft has the right-of-way, you must give way to that aircraft, and you may not pass over, under, or ahead of it unless well clear. An aircraft in distress, that is, an aircraft that requires immediate assistance because of a serious problem or an emergency, has the right of way over all other aircraft. If your aircraft and another aircraft of the same category are on a collision course, both you and the other pilot should take the proper action to avoid each other. What that action is depends on how you're approaching each other. If you see an aircraft approaching head-on or nearly so, both you and the other pilot must alter your courses to the right. If you overtake another aircraft traveling in the same direction, you must pass the slower aircraft well clear on the right. The slower aircraft has the right of way. If you're converging with another aircraft, the aircraft on the right has the right of way, and the one on the left must give way and turn away in a manner that will not interfere with the other's flight path. When aircraft of different categories converge, the least maneuverable aircraft has the right of way, unless the more maneuverable aircraft is in distress. For example, a balloon has the right of way over all other aircraft. A glider has the right of way over any airship, airplane, or rotorcraft. And an airship has the right of way over airplanes and rotorcraft. Finally, an aircraft that is towing or refueling another aircraft has the right of way over all other engine-driven aircraft. In addition to the right-of-way rules that govern air traffic, right-of-way rules also apply to specific airport operations. An aircraft on final approach or an aircraft that is landing has the right-of-way over other aircraft in the traffic pattern and those on the ground. When two or more aircraft that are preparing to land enter the traffic pattern at the same time, the aircraft at the lowest altitude has the right-of-way. However, this rule doesn't allow aircraft to enter the pattern below the specified traffic pattern altitude and disrupt or cut in front of aircraft already established in the pattern. According to the Now report, maneuvering accidents accounted for 1/4 of all pilot-related fatal accidents in 2006 and 1/3 in 2005. These accidents frequently involve pilots who fly below minimum safe altitudes. Two hazards are involved with flying below minimum safe altitudes. A pilot might not be aware of an approaching hazard in time to react to it. If the pilot does recognize a hazard, the aircraft's relatively low altitude might not allow enough time to carry out an avoidance or recovery procedure. For these reasons, the FAR specify minimum altitudes that you must maintain at all times during a flight, except during takeoffs and landings. Keep in mind that these altitudes are minimums. A higher altitude will give you more time to troubleshoot any problems and choose a better landing site in the event of an engine failure. Over a congested area, you're required to fly at least 1,000 feet above any obstacle within a horizontal radius of 2,000 feet of your aircraft. A congested area can be a city, a town, a settlement, or an open-air assembly of people. Obstacle clearance over uncongested and sparsely populated areas is reduced significantly. When flying over an uncongested area, you must fly at least 500 feet above the surface. Over sparsely populated or open water areas, you cannot fly within 500 feet of any person, vessel, vehicle, or structure. The lowest altitude at which you can fly over any terrain is one that permits you to make an emergency landing without posing an undue hazard to persons or property on the surface. Just how important is it to maintain a minimum safe altitude in mountainous terrain, especially at night? Review the details of this accident to see how easily you can fall prey to this all-too-common hazard, even in technically advanced aircraft. Every year, the AOPA Air Safety Foundation analyzes National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, statistics. to gain greater understanding of the causes and contributing factors in general aviation accidents. The result of this analysis is the Joseph T. Null Report. According to the Null Report, accident rates over the last 10 years reflect a downward trend, but there is still plenty of room for improvement, as accidents per flight hour are not decreasing significantly. Although it depends on where you learn to fly, mountain flying and flight over open water usually are beyond the scope of private pilot training. To operate safely over mountainous terrain or over open water, you need specialized training from an experienced instructor who's familiar with the area over which the flight will be conducted. Appropriate survival gear is an absolute necessity. Although it can be a rewarding experience, mountain flying in particular introduces numerous hazards for the inexperienced. Decreased aircraft performance at high altitudes, turbulence, rapidly changing weather, and difficulty in locating a forced landing site are just a few of the challenges facing you on a mountain flight. Controlled flight into terrain, or CFIT, is the term used when a qualified pilot flies an airworthy aircraft into terrain, including land, water, and obstacles, with inadequate awareness of the impending collision. CFIT accidents normally occur with little or no warning and at relatively high airspeeds, with the result that many such accidents are fatal. In fact, according to the FAA, CFIT accidents account for 17% of all general aviation fatalities. Six basic factors contribute to CFIT events. The loss of situational awareness is at the heart of most CFIT accidents. This generally occurs when the pilot is unaware of high terrain or obstacles in the vicinity of the airport. Both operational and non-operational cockpit distractions contribute to CFIT accident risk. Operational distractions are a part of the normal workload of piloting the aircraft and include handling ATC communications and watching for other traffic. Non-operational distractions are tasks unrelated to the task of piloting, such as idle conversation with passengers. Complacency can result from overconfidence and a lack of careful attention that can accompany a routine flight. While some flight operations can carry higher risks than others, the same risk management rules, precautions, and safety procedures apply to every flight, even those flights that seem routine. A lack of technical experience with the aircraft and its equipment, as well as a lack of experience with airport operations and ATC communications procedures, can contribute to CFIT accident risk. Another contributing factor is a lack of adequate preparation. That is, the failure to plan the flight properly, check weather forecasts, and review navigation charts. Think ahead and try to plan for every possibility. Finally, confusion can occur as a combination of the other CFIT factors or when the information that you need to fly the airplane safely becomes ambiguous. Any one of these factors is enough to increase the risk for a CFIT accident, but these factors often occur sequentially or in combination, sometimes with disastrous results. Three types of general aviation flight operations tend to be more vulnerable to CFIT. VFR-only pilots operating in marginal VFR or instrument meteorological conditions. This is sometimes referred to as scud running. An IFR-rated pilot who isn't prepared, proficient, or current runs a significantly increased risk of a CFIT accident. Low-flying aircraft operating in VFR conditions are also in jeopardy. This typically involves pilots flying below minimum safe altitudes. This includes legitimate flight operations, such as crop dusting, that require pilots to fly near trees, power or telephone lines, and similar obstacles. A reckless form of low-altitude flying is buzzing, which involves pilots who deliberately fly below FAA altitude recommendations simply to show off. About 25% of CFIT accidents occur during the takeoff and climb phase of flight. The primary contributors to CFIT accidents during this phase are incomplete or inadequate review of the departure, terrain around the departure airport, aircraft performance, density altitude, turbulence, distractions in the cockpit during the departure, and failure to plan for an unexpected return to the departure airport. CFIT avoidance begins on the ground during the pre-flight stage. It's the product of sound planning, good decision-making, and the ability to pilot the aircraft in every situation. You're responsible for ensuring that you're qualified for the flight conditions you'll encounter, that the aircraft is properly equipped for the flight, and that you conduct your flight according to the appropriate regulations and aircraft limitations. To avoid CFIT situations during takeoff and climb, always review the departure route, with particular attention to terrain surrounding the airport. Second, carefully review aircraft performance limitations at the reported density altitude to ensure that your aircraft can clear terrain safely. Third, review weather reports to identify potential areas of turbulence that could affect your flight. Fourth, while verbalizing the takeoff briefing, preset all communication frequencies, navigation frequencies, and course selectors if needed. Doing this during the takeoff briefing helps eliminate distractions during the vertical and lateral portions of takeoff and departure. Finally, review what you would do if you had to return to the airport unexpectedly. Although the risk of CFIT occurrences is lowest during cruise, 4.5% of accidents occur during this phase of flight. As with other phases of flight, multiple factors can contribute to the potential for a CFIT event during cruise. These factors include misreading or misinterpreting safe altitudes, losing situational awareness and becoming disoriented, flying into deteriorating weather conditions, requiring a descent to maintain VFR below the cloud layer, overestimating aircraft performance capabilities, and unplanned diversion to a different destination, resulting in flight over unfamiliar terrain. To avoid CFIT situations during cruise, always review your aeronautical charts prior to departure to determine the maximum elevation of terrain and obstructions for the proposed flight. Under all conditions, maintain situational awareness by monitoring the charted terrain depiction. The recommended minimum safe altitude in mountainous areas is 2,000 feet above the highest terrain, and the recommended minimum safe altitude in non-mountainous areas is 1,000 feet AGL. If you encounter IFR conditions, immediately make a 180-degree turn to return to VFR conditions and adjust your flight plan accordingly. When flying in mountainous terrain, plan carefully with regard to aircraft performance in the applicable density altitude. In addition, in mountainous terrain with high-velocity wind at mountaintop level, strong updrafts and downdrafts could affect your maneuverability. Devise an escape route in the event that you can't complete your flight as planned. The escape route can be as simple and effective as a 180-degree turn, providing that you have sufficient altitude and airspeed. The early morning arrival of a United Airlines DC-8 freighter into Salt Lake City was complicated by a mechanical problem. Only one communication radio was operating properly. The crew requested to leave the ATC frequency to talk to the company's maintenance department. The aircraft was supposed to hold near the Salt Lake City airport. While trying to resolve the mechanical issue, none of the crew were paying attention to the aircraft's position, and the plane drifted off course, crashing about 100 feet from the top of a mountain east of Salt Lake City. The highest percentage of CFIT accidents, approximately 61%, occurs during descent, approach, and landing, with approximately 42% occurring during the final approach and landing phase. Be especially vigilant and recognize these major risks of CFIT events during this phase of flight: improperly planning the descent and approach, responding to distractions in the cockpit during approach and landing, and neglecting to plan for a go-around. To avoid CFIT events during approach and landing, during the latter part of the cruise phase of the flight, and prior to initiating the approach, review the terrain features near the airport and plan a safe descent and approach using appropriate approach speeds and rates of descent. Prior to beginning your approach, preset communication and navigation frequencies. Early in your approach, establish the aircraft configuration, including airspeed and gear and flap positions. In addition, review what to do if you need to make a go-around. When one of 3 landing gear lights malfunctioned while Eastern Airlines Flight 401 was approaching Miami, the crew tried to resolve the problem, failing to notice that the autopilot had been disconnected by mistake. The aircraft began an unnoticed shallow descent and flew into the Everglades. Strong winds passing over and around the wings and horizontal stabilizer during taxi can be a safety concern. These winds can actually lift the aircraft, and in the most adverse conditions, it's possible for the aircraft to nose over and flip on its back. Generally, the most critical wind condition when taxiing a high-wing tricycle gear airplane is a strong quartering tailwind, because the high wing is susceptible to being lifted by the wind. In both high-wing and low-wing tricycle gear aircraft, use your aileron and elevator controls to counteract the wind and maintain control of your aircraft. For example, if the wind is blowing from the left front quarter, hold your left aileron up. The elevator should be in a neutral position to prevent the wind from exerting any lifting force on the tail. Similarly, if the wind is blowing from the right front quarter, hold the right aileron up with a neutral elevator. Conversely, if the wind is blowing from the left rear quarter, position the left aileron down with a down elevator. And for a right rear quarter wind, position the right aileron down with a down elevator. Remember also that when you turn while taxiing, the flow of air around the aircraft changes direction, and you'll have to compensate by altering the position of the control surfaces. You'll encounter some differences between taxiing tricycle gear aircraft and taxiing conventional gear or tailwheel aircraft. Compared with tricycle gear aircraft, in gusty and crosswind conditions, the tailwheel aircraft has an increased tendency to weather vane into the wind because of the greater surface area behind the main gear. In addition, the location of the center of gravity behind the main wheels can cause the aircraft to swerve further and further out of alignment after it's displaced. When taxiing a tailwheel aircraft, position the ailerons the same as you do for a tricycle gear aircraft. And in a tailwind, hold the elevator control forward just as you do in a tricycle gear aircraft. However, to help keep the tailwheel on the ground in a headwind, you have to hold the elevator control aft, which is opposite the appropriate action in a tricycle gear aircraft. Learning safe flight practices begins with your first flight and continues throughout your training. This lesson covered basic flight safety considerations that you'll continue to use throughout the entire course. You learned collision avoidance techniques, including visual scanning, accounting for blind spots, using aircraft lighting, and making clearing turns before practicing maneuvers. Right-of-way rules to help avoid conflicting traffic situations. Minimum safe altitudes over specific terrains. Best practices for avoiding risks that might lead to controlled flight into terrain. and what to do when taxiing in wind to avoid being flipped or rolled over.